Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and this is not a sponsored video, which you might have assumed if you're familiar with the Great Courses Plus or watch any of the other history-based YouTube channels, because some other YouTube channels have been sponsored by the Great Courses Plus and been promoting their service. Well, I think it would be very appropriate if one of us historical YouTubers actually gave a very honest review of the Great Courses Plus to tell you if it's worthwhile. Not being sponsored at all, okay? Not having any bias or incentive to be positive or negative. Though you might accuse me of having a bias in being negative. Now, let me explain why I don't, okay? I'm going to share with you my most honest opinion about the Great Courses Plus. You see, they had actually reached out to me to see if I would be willing to be sponsored by them and promote them to you. And it seems like a really good fit. If you're not familiar with the Great Courses Plus, they're basically a website that offers online educational videos on a huge range of subjects. And they say they are offered by qualified professionals. And this is where I have a bit of a hesitation, because people use the term, or any qualifications really, as credibility and evidence that what they say is accurate. And I don't like that. I've too many come across, and people making an appeal to authority, meaning I have this many PhDs and everything like this, and this is why I'm correct. That's not an argument. It's not evidence either, okay? If you want to prove yourself to be correct, you do that by the logic of your argument and the evidence you propose, not qualifications, okay? No authority on the matter. So just because the people who give these lectures on the Great Courses Plus have qualifications, I have never assumed that that means the information they're sharing is correct. And in my opinion, neither should you. And so when they approached me for this sponsorship, I felt I needed to do my due diligence to see if they are everything that they proclaim to be. So I signed up out of my own pocket. I gave them my money and signed up and they say, you know, the first month is free or something, but you still got to give your credentials and everything. And I did end up paying for a month or so to give them a look. Now, of course, I went to the subject that I am most versed in, okay? The area that I've done the most study, which of course, the medieval period. And there's a whole playlist with many videos. It's the High Middle Ages playlist by Professor Philip de Leader. And out of all the subjects in the medieval period, I went to the specific subject, again, that I'm most well read on. So that is the video on chivalry, and I found some things I disagreed with that I felt was completely incorrect. But that is some things. Overall, I actually loved the video. There were, I particularly really enjoyed Professor de Leader's breakdown on the chivalric romances. He shared some great references that I had never heard of before, and so that was actually really, really good. But was it 100% accurate in my opinion? No, it wasn't. I also really liked how he looked at how certain elements of chivalry could have affected moral practices in different areas, like in tournaments, medieval tournaments for one. So I wasn't able to contact the Great Courses Plus directly. Of course, I was contacted through a third party which represented them, and they just represent video sponsorships in general. And I told them, well, actually, I enjoyed it enough that I could recommend them because I got a lot of value out of the video, but I could only recommend them if I gave a very honest disclaimer about the fact that not everything in there is correct in my opinion. Now, this shouldn't have been too confronting because in regards to history, history is a very complex subject. When looking at any historical information, whether it's from pictorial information, written accounts to archaeological finds, we've got to take that and contextualize it, interpret it, okay? And unfortunately, invariably, there's always going to be a level of subjectivity that's going to go into this interpretation because you'll have two historians that are looking at the same information who draw different conclusions. And then you have information based on time period where most historians reach a certain consensus about information that we have, and then something new is discovered that changes the game completely and recontextualizes everything that we knew before. And so when in trying to learn historical information, the most current up-to-date stuff generally is more reliable than the previous conclusions that we had on the subject. And there's a lot of interesting information that's only been discovered recently, especially in regards to swords. Like James Elmsley has pioneered incredible information and stuff about the falchion and messes and how they were developed, and there's a lot of misconceptions and erroneous ideas that have existed in the recent past about history. So whenever you look at any of the lectures on the Great Courses Plus, I think it's useful to try and find out when the lecture was given to be able to find out how reliable it might be. But even then, even if it is like made in just the last couple of years, that's also not a guarantee of it being 100% correct. So for someone who doesn't know anything about chivalry, and they watch the video that I really took a close look at, well, they would come out of it having some ideas that I would consider incorrect. Now, I actually have, you might consider, some controversial opinions about the concept of learning and gaining information, and where I actually feel in some cases it is better to have the wrong information than having no information on the subject at all, because having the wrong information can usually be a very necessary and important step in learning the right information that you might have never learned at all if you didn't have any information on the subject in the first place. And I actually feel it is a wonderful thing that these lectures just even exist, okay, because most of it is correct, and if someone is passionate about the subject and they continue studying, they will eventually learn some of the incorrect information from it. But again, it is a wonderful benefit that they're just there in the first place. So I disagree emphatically with the idea, that the statements that people have and share about saying, people who don't know what they're talking about shouldn't say anything on the subject at all. No, we should have as many people trying to talk about these wonderful things as possible, because it creates discussion and opportunity to find out if someone actually has the incorrect information. So rather than not letting misinformed people talk about these subjects, let them talk about it, let everyone talk about them, okay? It's only when specific misinformation can lead to actual harm and detriment is when maybe we should be, saying you probably shouldn't be, saying or spreading information. Like, ridiculous things. Dousing fire with gasoline or something like that. That's bad information, and no, that shouldn't be spread. But in regards to harmless things about history where it's just a bit of misinformation here and there, no, we shouldn't try and censure people in talking about things that they're interested in, because it's just being wrong is a natural step in finding out what's right. So you might be, almost frothing at the mouth in wanting to know what I actually felt was incorrect in this video or not, or you might not care, or you're just passing into it. There's a number of, areas of concern you might have. But anyway, I will fulfill that desire, if the desire exists, to let you know what I felt was specifically incorrect. And there's a number of things, but fundamentally I can simplify it down to how Professor DeLeader defined what chivalry was. In fact, Professor Philip DeLeader, I'll just call him Phil, the overriding premise of his lecture was that chivalry was a means to make knights less violent.
During the 12th century, certain medieval authors began to elaborate a code of conduct, a code of ethics that medieval nobles were expected to follow. They began to create the chivalric ideal that we so often associate with the High Middle Ages. They did so by blending older heroic ideals with new ecclesiastical interests in trying to stop violence and stop the warfare that was plaguing Europe. Chivalry, as it emerges during the 12th century, was a very potent weapon in the fight against unrestrained noble violence.
You see, this kind of statement is tricky because broken down to its specific point, it is kind of correct, okay? It was able to be a means to make knights less violent, but the issue I have with it is that it implies something, even though it doesn't say explicitly, it implies very emphatically that this was what chivalry was kind of meant to do, to curb noble violence and make them less violent, which is completely incorrect in another way of trying to understand historical chivalry. And I have a direct reference where I actually feel to be I found to be the most reliable kind of breakdown and study on chivalry that I've ever read. Professor DeLeader does go on to make a disclaimer in his lecture where he says that there are different interpretations of chivalry, and I was so relieved to hear him make this disclaimer, but then he goes on to say that there are certain qualities in chivalry that were most common and uniform across the board. And some of those things he lists I absolutely disagree with. That these qualities were most definitely not uniformly and commonly adopted amongst every subjective interpretation of chivalry that existed within the medieval period.
Before attempting to define chivalry, however, a disclaimer. Despite the fact that chivalric literature is filled with ogres, dragons, and highly improbable events, it is in fact rather complex. There is a great deal of variety within the different chivalric romances. There are almost as many different chivalries as there were chivalric romances. Nonetheless, there are certain common elements that pop up again and again in chivalric romances, both in terms of the qualities that a knight should possess and what a knight was supposed to do. You were expected to be brave, you were expected to be honest, you were expected to be loyal, you were expected to be generous. You were also expected to display prowess. They were expected to be courteous, despite cleaving people in half frequently. They were supposed to speak well. They were supposed to exhibit good manners. They were expected to take these qualities and to use them to protect those who could not protect themselves. They were supposed to use their prowess, their loyalty, their generosity to defend clerics, peasants, widows, virgins, orphans, people who were any combination of the above. Chivalric knights were supposed to defend all those who could not defend themselves.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
I refer most of my information about chivalry from the book written by Nigel Saul entitled Chivalry in Medieval England. It's a phenomenal book, and from the things that I've read from this book, seems to marry in very well the way chivalry was identified by actual historical sources on the subject. And these are actual medieval authors who wrote about chivalry from the period. So we're looking at, medieval authors such as Raymond Lull, Geoffrey de Carny, and also Chrétien de Troyes, which Professor de Leader also references in his own video lectures. And so to quote Nigel Saul on this subject, this is what he says about chivalry in regards to violence. And what's interesting, this is where he is, so great, this is where I first read about chivalry being subjective based on the individual, and is going through different ways chivalry was contextualized by the individual in the period, and it was just, mind-blowing. It was the most accurate way that I've ever read of chivalry being properly understood in proper context of the period, and again it matched to the other medieval authors as well. And so he says, for others yet again, after going through certain examples, for others yet again, it, referring to chivalry, is essentially the rough and ready business of tit-for-tat justice which, so far from limiting violence, actually spread it by embodying an honour code which prescribed retaliation for every minor affront. That contradicts directly Professor de Leader's assertion that chivalry was a means to try and lessen violence. And you can also see this by those medieval authors as well. So Raymond Lull, Geoffrey de Carny and stuff like that, their writings define what chivalry is in kind of strict terms, but what you really notice when you read them, they're not actually defining what chivalry was in their time. They are writing how they saw chivalry according to their own perspective, how they wanted knights to act. And what's interesting, by the very fact that they felt a need to write this down, implies the fact that it wasn't universally accepted. They felt a need to teach and spread these things to get more knights to adopt it, which meant there were knights out there who didn't follow chivalry the way they are prescribing or detailing and outlining it. Which is what so many people have interpreted those writings to mean. Well, this is clearly what knights were. No, knights were not like this, okay? This is what they wanted knights to act like. Because chivalry was subjective based on the individual, and this was their own subjective interpretation of how they wanted chivalry to be. Now, I actually wrote kind of a whole page of just little things that I could comment on, but I won't go into the detail here because this is just to establish the fact that I found things to be incorrect in the videos, and if they exist in this one video, well, chances are they probably exist in other videos as well. So you need to go into any study of history or any subject really, just with an appropriate level of skepticism, all right? If you hear one fact, wait until you hear it from a number of other credible sources. Try and fact check it, and if there's no reason to doubt it after you hear it a couple of times from credible sources, take it on board, okay? There's nothing wrong to agree with it, but if you do come across something eventually that does contradict it, and they give proper evidence for, Don't dig your heels in, go where the evidence is telling you. So yes, I wrote back to the third party saying I could promote them, all right? I would just need to make a disclaimer. And summarizing it in a much, more concise way of what I'm saying here. I'm giving you the detail here, but I would have said something in a much more concise way saying, look, there were some things I disagreed with, double check things, stuff like that, but most of what I heard was actually really, really good. I enjoyed it and I can recommend it. I never got a reply after I said that. Why? I got a reply from the third party saying, oh, it shouldn't be a problem, we'll just let them know. And then I never got a reply back. So I think they contacted the Great Courses Plus and they were like, no, we don't want someone like that to sponsor. We only want people to tell everyone else that we're great. Which is a bit unfortunate in my opinion, because it feels like they didn't want someone to be completely honest about their product. And of course, they're completely entitled to that, all right? They're wanting, to promote their product and they didn't want anyone to, they have the freedom to choose how it will be promoted and who to go with. So I have no sour grapes at all in that regard. Don't think I do, okay? In fact, I'd be more than happy to be sponsored by them in the future if they allowed me to make the appropriate disclaimer, because like I said, there was some really awesome stuff like Delita's lecture on feudalism. Wow, gee, that was brilliant. It was really, really good. And it's funny, I know less about feudalism in general than I do about chivalry, so I was less in a position to be able to point out things that were incorrect or not, but it gives me more information. And the more information I have, gives me the greater ability to be able to find out what's right and wrong. You need to have the information in the first place to know if it's wrong. But most of it sounded really, really good and, confirmed and agreed with many of the other things, but there was a lot of new stuff as well. Like, there was this great thing about the definition and the conflict of what feudalism is. Like, he was talking about this big debate in the historical community by real high up academics and stuff about the proper historical accurate definition of feudalism, which I was completely oblivious to. So you can learn some really good stuff. And it does seem there is information there available that I'm sure if I dug deep enough, I would be able to find it in other areas on the internet. The internet's just this incredible resource, and the information that I have found through my own research and study, you can learn so much, but it's presented in a far better way on the Great Courses Plus that you can also digest a lot easier because it's a video lecture right there in front for you. It's funny, some of the other videos, like because there's other YouTubers who are sponsored by the Great Courses Plus, and they say that the information in this video is provided by the Great Courses Plus or something like that. And when it comes to weapons and stuff, the areas, like I said, I'm more informed on, they say some incorrect things. And so I'm yet to find the exact videos on the Great Courses Plus playlist that talk about medieval and classical era weapons and stuff, where this incorrect information is coming from. But it seems like there have been some videos produced where they cite the Great Courses Plus as their sources, where they have shared incorrect information. So in terms of is it worth your money? I do think it is, because it is presenting information in a more easily accessible way, whereas if you want to go through the other route or the internet route, I do feel you can find the information that is available on the Great Courses Plus, which is the interesting thing. I think most of what you can learn from there, you could probably learn from free on the internet, just with more work. That's the difference. That's where I think the money component can be a bit more justified. And that is my honest opinion of the Great Courses Plus. I've kept my subscription to it, though it's saying it's lapsed. And I'm not sure if I'm bothered enough to do it, because ever since doing the research and watching some of these videos, I will admit I haven't looked up any more videos from it. So maybe I will let the subscription lapse. But there is that side of me that really enjoyed some of those subjects about the chivalric romances and feudalism stuff that does, encourage me to want to watch the rest of the Middle Ages, High Middle Ages playlist. So who knows, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I really wanted to share with you an honest, unbiased opinion on this product, because it's getting promoted a lot by other historical YouTubers. You've probably seen it, so I think it's fair and you deserve this honest review. And so in summary, I think most of the information there is correct, but if they claim that everything they say is reliable and truthful, no, I don't agree with that at all. Still, I think there is enough information there that is worthwhile for the product to exist in the first place, and you might want to give it a go. Or if you want information on medieval arms and armor and other things like that, you can stay subscribed to this channel, Shadiversity. There's a good plug. I don't plug myself very often. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again. And until then, farewell.